I wanted to do an omnibus self-care message because there are a couple of the key pieces of the self-care regime that I think the crew of new people haven't heard yet. And sometimes I forget to say these for a little bit. So here's everything. If you have something coming up in the body, that's normal. This is a highly restructuring practice. And so we will definitely come up into challenges to our habitual movement patterns. And most importantly, if you notice anything, stuff coming up around joint complexes, then you kind of got to hit the brakes. And the biggest thing, if there's anything coming up in the body that is actually not on a regenerative healing arc, but seems to be on a degenerative, like harmful arc, is to stop that process right away. And the perennial question of, is this an injury or is this an opening? Just be careful and notice if you're actually doing harm with the way that you're practicing. First principle of the practice is nonviolence, right? And nonviolence starts at home. So practice in the body you have today. It's always the thing. Practice in the mind you have today, practice in the body you have today. There's a sensory richness that the postures provide to us, right? And so as long as we're smart and don't get attached to the posture as some sort of a concept or a thing or something we're identified with, then postures provide data and information. So the sensory sort of data gathering mode of the postures is really your friend here, as long as there's not a drive to execute a certain conceptual version of whatever posture, right? The practice is there to give you data. So that's the first thing, practice in the body you have today. Going forward, though, if something comes up around a joint complex or just feelings of disease, the two places always to look are the diet and the self-care around the joints. So most stuff, if it's a generalized body situation, can be traced to the diet. You know, the diet and the practice are just two sides of the same coin. And I don't say a lot about diet because it's so personal. But if you have inflammatory food and drink in the system, you're practicing with that, right? And so it's interesting. The inflammatory foods create certain sort of hooks inside of our system, literally within the physical body itself. And so sometimes they can feel like they help, but also if there's dis-ease, it may be from alcohol, sugar, eating meat, for some people wheat and certain allergens, right? So just notice the effects. And the first thing is to go for an anti-inflammatory diet as that manifests to you. And you'll feel it in the GI tract, right? Then there's the whole self-care regime for any sensation around joints, right? The first one, make sure you have enough magnesium in your system. So I really love Epsom salts baths, especially the first few years of the practice. There's the Dead Sea Warehouse, which is my go-to for Epsom salts and all things that come from them. Highly recommended, and they have been a real life changer for many students. So that's just an easy way to get magnesium into the system. It's a light sedative, so you do it in the evening and wash it off because you don't want you don't want to be salty walking around. Second, use your hands. Train your hands over many, many years to be super intelligent. So the act of actually, self care through the touch and the sort of moving around of your tissues gives you more information than anything else. So getting really comfortable with self-massage and with using your own hands as your primary data gathering device is just a really big part of Ayurveda. And like, this is your tool. And at first they might not pick up that much, and they might not also heal as much, but this is really it. You know, we tend to see the practice itself or other people as the source of our healing, but that's never the case. Like, we are always ever healing ourselves. This is the only way any of the transformation happens, is through our own action. And the Ayurvedic principle of self-massage and self-care really brings that home. So the tendency to want to outsource our care, is normal in our society, but most of it comes from just self-touch, truly, in a loving and radically accepting manner. So the primary de-inflammatory that is traditionally used in this practice, combined with self-massage, is castor oil. And that is not just in Ayurveda, it's part of the numerous sort of Western herbalist traditions as well. I strongly recommend going to any health food store, getting a, quote, castor oil compress, and following the instructions on the compress for application and removal of the castor oil. So those are widely available around here, because Edgar Cayce was a big proponent of castor oil healing modalities. So it's topical application using the castor oil to remove inflammation from the tissues. Castor oil also increases blood flow, so if while you're at it you want to run a weird experiment and put some castor oil on your eyebrows, if you're doing a series of castor oil packs for a month, you can test the theory that it has some sort of effect on the system by oiling your eyebrows over the course of a month of treatment and noticing the effects on the other side. It could be a weirdo experiment, but definitely will make most of you believers. The castor oil can be removed with all kinds of different things, including soap, not soap or powder, but the easiest one is Dr. Bronner's. And you want to be careful not to put it down your drain, because it can definitely clog your pipes. And it can also be a little bit of a fire hazard if you're putting cloths soaked in castor oil in your dryer. Just be careful with all of that. The cleanup is a thing. Ice. If you've got something coming up at a joint complex, we can use ice for a chronic or for an acute thing. Ice over time, it doesn't fit into the practice in the same way it might in certain sports medicines modalities, because we also want to take care to keep things moving. But especially if there's any acute thing after practice, getting ice on the joint in question it's the most direct and quick anti-inflammatory strategy. If there's a thing in a difficult place, sometimes frozen peas or blueberries or riced cauliflower, sitting on that if it's at the hamstring origin, or sometimes the sternoclavicular joint will start talking to you, just like that right on the sternoclavicular joint can be the move. Use sparingly, but especially if there's puffiness around the joint, that can be the thing. Nsaids, I don't touch them. The healthy inflammatory response throughout, the sort of Western body is pretty complicated by the overuse of Nsaids. I'm sure you all know the story. If you do use them, not before practice. The last thing you want to do before going to practice in the body that you have today and sort of gather information is to numb the source of information by taking an NSAID. So do what you will, but be very, very judicious about timing if you are going to use drugs, right? They definitely can de-inflame tissues. They're incredibly powerful for that. But the last thing you want to do is use them as some sort of pain reduction means at the moment when, pain is really there to give you information. I think that's all in the general self-care category. But the biggest thing is, making sure that you're practicing a way that you can continue your practice. The person who needs to be all or nothing every day, all the time, is the person who can't sustain, for the long time. And the general, happiness and well-being that comes from a long-term sustained practice are really what we're going for. So we want to make sure that we don't get sidetracked by something that can really, really easily be avoided with a sort of conceptual structure that helps us keep the long term in mind. Practice, positions come and go, and the body is subject to a lot of changes, especially in times like these. So just having the equanimity and the humility to sort of alter the program as needed is of course key, which you all know, and you don't need to hear me say that. Taking an interest in what's going on rather than a problem-solving approach usually brings the body into a healthy and gentle relationship with the practice and with the mind. Talk to you soon.